I'm Stan Gerson, and welcome this afternoon for a really remarkable celebration of the establishment of the Rebecca E. Barchas MD Professorship in Translational Psychiatry and the appointment of Andrew Pieper as the inaugural chairholder. And a special welcome to Rebecca's family. I'm glad that so many of you could come for this special event, and to Andrew's family and colleagues who are joining us this afternoon. For universities and for schools, professorships are really remarkably important accomplishments and experiences, and it's hard to imagine that the first professorship holder is only the first, because these will go on in perpetuity throughout the life of this university. Right now, there are more than 120 endowed professorships at the School of Medicine, many of them less than a decade old because they occurred during our most recent university forward-looking campaign. But we are incredibly grateful to the donors who make these professorships possible. They allow us to both celebrate, retain, and respect our most vigorous, insightful talent of the School of Medicine and certainly of the university as a whole. So everybody in the room, keep it in mind as you build your assets. We'd be delighted to help you with that. Let me tell you a little bit about Rebecca Barchas. She received her bachelor's degree from Grinnell College in 1971, and her then-to-become lawyer classmate is with us this evening. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa. She attended our medical school here as a member of the class of 1975, completing a residency in psychiatry at university hospitals, so both institutions know her well. Since Dr. Barchas and I had a chance to discuss the concept of this professorship earlier this year, she also left me with a book to peruse, so I get to tell you a little bit about her family. Her remarkable parents, Samuel and Cecile Barchas, had a side hobby which turned into a collection of more than 5,000 books, letters, and figures on the history of science that the family donated to Stanford University for a collection in their name in 1999. And I learned from the introductions written by her parents that Rebecca is listed last, I presume perhaps the youngest of the 8 children, and that the collection took on amazing experience since her parents started that in 1940 as young adults, young parents, with an astronomy book written by James Ferguson in the 1770s. And while the rest is history, the impact that this collection has had on the history of science is quite remarkable, since it covers more than 300 years of science. And then Stanford augmented the collection with a 1610 edition from Johannes Kepler's work to expand and really help further endow the significance of that collection. So the next time any of us are in Palo Alto, drop in. Dr. Barchas' collection to the field of psychiatry are threefold. She spent 34 years in private practice as a general adult psychiatrist, where she was deeply committed to quality care. She became very adept at both combining psychotherapy and psychopharmacology, only rarely needing to hospitalize more than her 200 patients under chronic care. And she has perhaps most proud of the fact that, given the spectrum of disorders that she saw, none of her patients committed suicide. After retiring from clinical practice in 2013, she wrote an article that was published in Psychiatric Services in 2021 on electroconvulsive therapy, but really about the stigma that had at the time. She was quite emotionally honest about her experience with that procedure, written both from the point of view of a patient and as a physician. And that led to the American Psychiatric Association identifying and awarding her the Distinguished Life Fellow recognition. And now that Dr. Barchas has created this endowed professorship in translational psychiatry designed to really bridge science, prevention, treatment, or the cure of psychiatric and neuropsychiatric illnesses, I think it'll be transformation for our joint institutions. It's a very special professorship because of the conditions that Dr. Barchas placed on us, making sure that this was a highly endowed professorship. It, in fact, is at the level, the top level for this university. So the official status of this professorship is a university professorship. And I'm going to ask Dr. Barchas to come and share with us some thoughts. Let's welcome you on stage.
Thank you very much, Dean Gerson. I feel so happy. I'm happy because today culminates and celebrates what for me is a 40-year dream come true. And what I want to do this afternoon is give you a very good sense for what my experience of being a chair donor has been like. In order to do that, I actually have to go back before 40 years ago. I have to go back to my childhood because so many of our attitudes actually form in childhood. I am a very fortunate person because I had wonderful parents. Both of my parents were very loving, very supportive, and very encouraging. My dad used to tell me to shoot for the stars, and my mom, she read to me a lot. I don't know at what age she switched from reading me stories about animals to reading me stories about women in science, women in medicine, the microbe hunters. She was always telling me how fascinating was the human mind. And so by the age of 6, I knew that when I grew up, I wanted to become a psychiatrist. And I was a very determined kid. In fact, probably being determined is my single most outstanding quality that I've carried with me throughout my life. Because once I decided I wanted to become a psychiatrist, then everything I did was aimed with that goal in mind. And I always did as well as I could at every level of the educational process. Plus, each of my parents had a love of learning such that they each tried to supplement for me things that I was learning in the classroom. I am also very fortunate in having wonderful brothers and sisters. I am the youngest of 8. I'm 72 years old now. My oldest brother is 14 years older than I am. My 4 oldest siblings are all in their 80s. 5 of my 7 siblings are still alive. And my siblings have always been my best friends. They were when I was a child, and they are to this day. The sibling who had the single strongest impact on my professional growth was my oldest brother, Jack. Now, Jack had a very interesting career himself. For 25 years, he was a psychiatrist, neuroscience researcher at Stanford, followed by his being a dean of neuroscience research at UCLA for 4 years, followed by his being chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at Cornell for 25 years. So Jack only retired about 2.5 or 3 years ago, well into his 80s. But when Jack had a big impact on my life was in the late 1960s. Because after I graduated from high school, Jack invited me to come work in his lab at Stanford for 3 summers in a row. Well, I was so excited, I didn't even go to my own high school graduation. I just wanted to skedoodle up to Stanford as quickly as I could get there. And I had a wonderful experience in Jack's lab. For starters, Jack was an outstanding mentor. Plus, he had his very first medical student, Roland Cirinello, also mentoring me. And every day I would come into the lab and Roland would ask me questions because Roland wanted to make sure that I fully understood everything we were doing and why we were doing it. In addition to being an outstanding mentor, Jack also just knew how to make his lab a happy experience. He knew how to support people and encourage people and inspire people. He knew how to help us know how to work cooperatively with each other. And Jack was also very generous in spirit. He always tried to promote all the rest of us more than he tried to promote himself. At the end of the 3 summers, I had my name on 2 papers, one of which was published in the journal Nature. So I was feeling really good about those 3 summers. And when I finished college, I then went on to Case Western Reserve Medical School, graduating in '75. And then because I had so much respect and affection for Doug Bond, who was the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at that time, I stayed on at University Hospitals of Cleveland for my psychiatry residency. Sadly, Doug Bond died a 1.5 years into my residency, but I'm very grateful that I had an opportunity to know Doug Bond because he was an extremely special human being. When I finished my psychiatry residency in 1979, I moved to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and then practiced there for 34 years in a private group practice setting as a general adult psychiatrist, retiring in 2013. Now, in the 1980s, when I was in my early 30s, 4 things happened that had a significant effect on my decision to create this endowed chair, or impact at least on the endowed chair. The first thing was my decision for creating this endowed chair. And that came about as a result of a conversation I had with my oldest brother, Jack. I had just started a job, just started to earn a salary beyond that which a person earns as a resident. And I said to my oldest brother, I said, Jack, John, my husband John Gears, John and I aren't going to be having children, and it makes me wonder, what should I do with the money I earn? I really don't know what to do with the money I earn. And Jack said to me, give it to causes you believe in, and you might want to consider creating an endowed chair at a university. Well, as soon as Jack said that to me, I immediately knew that I would love to do that. And I immediately had the vision of him and his lab, and I immediately knew that I would want it to be a research chair. And I think even then, I fully appreciated that it's less what a person earns and more what a person is able to save that enables that person to reach their financial goals. And I had always been a good saver, and I'd always lived modestly. So I knew I could very easily continue to live modestly, and I would be able to save. And I thought, I could do that. I can do that. I will do that. And with the same type of determination that I had had as a little 6-year-old when I knew I wanted to become a psychiatrist, well, now I was already a psychiatrist, but now I had a new goal. And my new goal was that I was going to create an endowed chair at a university. And the university that I felt a sense of connection with was Case Western Reserve University. So I started consciously saving money with that goal in mind. And it wasn't very often. It was just occasionally, on rare occasions, that I would say to my husband, if I thought he wanted to buy something that I thought was totally frivolous or had no redeeming value, and I would say, honey, please don't buy X, Y, or Z. I'm trying to save our money for something much more important. And that never went over very well, and I could never figure out why. But in all seriousness, all joking aside, my husband died in 2019. But I knew had I been the one to die first, and had he survived me, he would have made sure this endowed chair happened because he knew how important it was to me. A second thing that happened in the 1980s was that my parents gave their world-class book collection to Stanford University. And the story behind that really is that my dad had been a lawyer in Los Angeles. And then in 1956, when I was only 6.5 years old, I hadn't yet even turned 7 that year, and my dad was only 44, he had a very severe heart attack that forced him to retire from his law practice. So my parents left Los Angeles and moved the family to southeastern Arizona, where they found a small family little cattle ranch, and they bought it. So I grew up on a ranch and had all sorts of experiences that I would never have had I grown up in Los Angeles. But it didn't matter whether my dad was a lawyer in Los Angeles or a cattle rancher in Arizona. What mattered about my dad is that he was a man with a remarkable intellect, and he was a genuine scholar, and he loved science, and he grew to really love the history of science. And so in the late 1930s, around 1938, he had walked into his first antiquarian bookstore in Los Angeles and bought his first book in the history of science, and he fell in love with that, and he started then buying other books in the history of science, other books that were first edition rare books in the history of science. And each of these books was like a gem in itself. And as his collection grew, it became more and more magnificent. Now, the books were, of course, a wonderful investment, but he wasn't buying them to sell them. He was buying them because he had such a love for the content, and because he had such a strong appreciation for the impact these books had on the society of their time, contemporaneous to when they were published. And so there was a thrill to him in buying those books in the first edition. And after 4.5 decades of collecting the books, he had what was considered one of the finest book collections in the history of science in the country that was still in private hands. And so in 1982, he gave his book collection. He and Mom gave it to Stanford University because they wanted to give it to an institution that they hoped would really appreciate it. And it's called the Samuel I. and Cecile M. Barchas Collection in the History of Science and Ideas at Stanford University. Their collection not only had a tremendous impact on their own lives, but it also understandably had an impact on the lives of their 8 children and on their grandchildren. A third thing that happened in the 1980s that had an impact on my giving this chair was on a trip back to Cleveland in the 1980s, I made a point of seeing our former dean and one-man admission committee, Jack Coy, and he was our former dean, and I said to him that it was my intention to create an endowed chair for Case Western Reserve. And he responded by saying to me, endowed chairs are what make a good university become a great university. And of course, those words are as true today as they were when he said it, and they'll always be so very true. And the effect of his saying that to me only made me realize even more the significance and the impact of this, that this chair could potentially have. And so I knew I wanted to do it. The fourth thing that happened to me in the early 1980s was a conversation I had with another brother. Now, I've got very good brothers. I also have very good sisters, but I do have very good brothers. And I said to my brother Mark, who is 8 years older than I am, and who I had always thought of as a very savvy person, I said, Mark, I don't know how to invest money. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm afraid of the stock market. I trust you. If I give you some money to invest, will you invest it for me? And he said, sure. So I sent my brother Mark, I sent him $74,000, and he bought some property with that money that he also co-owned, and he got 2 other couples involved, and they co-owned it with us. And we 4 couples just sat on the property for 4 decades while Mark was managing it, and Mark was the one who absorbed all the headaches, but he's the guy who managed it. And then finally, this past year, in 2021, somebody seriously wanted to buy the property. And as we were all now 40 years older, and 2 of us were now widows, it made sense to sell. And my share of that property had appreciated from $74,000 to $1.5 million. So at that point, I immediately knew I didn't have to wait until I died for this gift to Case Western Reserve to become an estate gift. I could give it in the present instead. Now, my gift to State Case Western Reserve is a $3.5 million gift. But I figure that $1.5 million of that $3.5 million came rather easily to me because of the good choices of my brother. The other $2 million of the $3.5 million came because of my long hours and hard work. And so at that point, my phone calls with Case Western Reserve increased at a much greater rate. And what I want to do is give you a sense for what some of that was like. First, I've got to talk about Bob Ronis, because I've known Bob Ronis for, 15, 16, 17 years. I first met him in my own living room in Virginia Beach, Virginia, because this was right when he was starting his tenure as chairman of the Department of Psychiatry, and he and Evie Neufeld made a trip to Virginia, and they came and visited me. They already knew that it was my plan to give a endowed chair, which I thought would be an estate gift, but they wanted to understand better what my vision for the chair was. And after that initial meeting with Bob, I periodically would call Bob. I would call him when I had a question or a thought about the chair, or an idea about the chair, or some anxiety about the chair, or worry about this chair, or when I wanted the proper nuance for the wording in my estate plan. And anytime I called Bob, he always made me feel better. He's a good psychiatrist. And he would be very patient with me. He would listen very attentively to whatever my concern was, and then talk me through whatever my concern was. And an hour later, I'd be feeling much, much better. And he was just very helpful to me. So I always thought of Bob Ronis as a wonderful resource. And he was. Even when I called him, at 5:30 on a Friday evening, at about the time he might have wanted to be going home, but then he spent the next hour talking to me instead. So I thank you, Bob. You've been a wonderful resource to me and a wonderful friend to me, and I thank you. I also was now having much more contact with Lisa Tersini. Lisa Tersini is the executive director of the Office of Development and Alumni Affairs. And Lisa's the person who talked me through all of the steps, each and every step, and she would tell me where we were in the step and what had to be done next, and she would explain things to me. The way I conceptualize Lisa in my mind, I think of Lisa like a master mechanic in front of a huge machine, and she keeps all the parts of the machine perfectly greased and perfectly tuned, such that any process that goes through the machine goes through flawlessly. And if there is any kind of little error, she catches it immediately, gets it corrected, and it's as though it never happened at all. So Lisa was very helpful to me, and she set up an appointment, a Zoom call for me to have with Dean Stan Gerson. And I will always remember I had that call on October 1st, 2021, which was the very first day that Dean Gerson was the full dean of the medical school and no longer the acting dean of the medical school. And I thought to myself, well, this is like the first day of a new chapter of the dean's life, and maybe it will also be the first day of a new chapter of my own life. And sure enough, it was, because it was a wonderful conversation I had with Dean Gerson. It was a Zoom meeting, but I almost immediately lost the video part of the Zoom connection. So I only had the audio. But it didn't matter, because you don't have to see enthusiasm. You can hear enthusiasm. And as I was telling Dean Gerson my vision for this endowed chair, I could hear in his responses that he really was enthusiastic about virtually everything that I was proposing. And what I was proposing was also somewhat unique. The chair was for a large amount because I wanted it to genuinely strengthen the Department of Psychiatry. I wanted it to be a research chair. I wanted it's a $3.5 million gift. $3 million of it goes toward endowing the professor's salary, because I wanted it to be at a level that would be attractive to the best quality people anywhere in the country. And I at least didn't want the amount of it to be any kind of deterrent toward their wanting to come. And I also wanted $500,000 to be endowed as a secondary support fund for the lab. I remembered that back in the 60s when I was in Jack's lab, I remembered that it seemed like researchers were always concerned about where their funding sources were going to come from. And so I assume that they continue to have some of that anxiety. And so I wanted to reduce that, even if just a little bit, because I wanted to create a steady flow in perpetuity, and $500,000 might only create like $25,000 a year until it starts to grow. But even $25,000 a year is still $25,000 more than the lab would have had otherwise. And if it can help to defray expenses, or for new equipment, or to compensate trainees of the lab, then that is obviously a good thing. I also wanted, in the selection of the chair, it's a 5-person selection committee, and I wanted one of the members of that committee to not be on the Case Western Reserve faculty. I wanted instead for that person to be a member of the National Academy of Medicine in the Psychiatry division, because I felt like that person might be in a better position to be advising, to be suggesting names from some other university or some other institution, should that be necessary. And again, I wanted this chair to go to the best possible person, and it didn't matter to me whether they were already starting from within the university or being recruited to the university. And there were other conditions as well, because I really wanted this to strengthen the department. But virtually all of that, Dean Gerson was enthusiastic about. And so by the end of that call, it was like we had a virtual handshake. And the next step was that Lisa and I then worked with Amanda Penny. She is the executive director of the Office of Strategic Giving. And with her task was to create a gift agreement that put into writing that which Dean Gerson and I had verbally agreed to. Well, at first, I honestly didn't even understand why we needed a gift agreement, because I knew he would be good, Dean Gerson would be good for what he had said, and I hoped he knew I would be good for what I had said. But then I realized that beyond all the obvious reasons why a person does a gift agreement, they also do it because decades and generations from now, when a new chairholder is selected, the university always goes back to that original gift agreement in order to see what the donor intent was. Well, once I understood that, then I wanted my donor intent in virtually every sentence of the gift agreement. And it might not be every sentence, but it comes pretty close. And so I was very happy to sign the gift agreement in November of 2021. And 3 months later, the selection committee chose Andrew Pieper as the inaugural chairholder. Now, I've got to talk about Andrew because you see, the quality of the chair holder affects the chair donor. I first found out about Andrew from Bob Bronis about a year ago in July of 2021. When he knew I was now going to be giving the chair in that calendar year. And he said, Rebecca, you are in luck. We have the perfect person for this chair already here in Cleveland. He's already here. He came to us through university hospitals, and he was recruited by the Harrington Discovery Institute. And he's outstanding. He's well trained, and he's just a marvelous human being, and he's got a terrific background, and he does good research. And he's saying all these things to me. And he gives me things to read about Andrew, and I feel very impressed. And I know I want to have contact with him directly, but I realize I should not do that until after I at least know that I'm going to give this chair to Case Western Reserve for sure. And I didn't know that until October, that October 1st call. But after I knew that, then I knew I wanted to make contact with Andrew because I never wanted a chairholder or even a potential chairholder to think of me just as a source of funding. I wanted that chairholder to know me as a person, to know what mattered to me, to know what I cared about, to know what my values are. So I decide to send Andrew an email. And I get his email address from his VTI that's online. And I choose my words very carefully because I don't want Andrew to think that I think he necessarily is going to be chosen as the chairholder. I just want Andrew to know that I know he is being seriously considered for that position. So I write the email and I send it. And Andrew sends me back a really nice response. So nice that I write him again. And you see, that's how friendships get started. Because what I knew about Andrew from that very first email exchange was that he was very spontaneous, very responsive, very appreciative. He didn't know that he was going to be the chairholder, chosen to be the chairholder, but he did know that I was going to be giving money for medical research. And he was very appreciative for that concept. And it was clear he was a person of great depth. So I knew I was going to like him. And I think I can speak for both of us and say that by our second or third email back and forth, we each knew that regardless of whether or not he was chosen to be the chairholder, he and I were going to become friends, and good friends at that, because what linked us was not an endowed chair. What linked us was having shared values. And so we just kept communicating by email and getting to know each other better and better. And I knew then that he was a terrific person. But I also knew that there was one more part of the equation that I needed to know in my own mind before I would know that Andrew was the person that I really wanted to see in this endowed chair. But it would require my going to Cleveland because I wanted to see Andrew in the context of his lab. And I wanted to be able to speak to people in his lab. And I knew I was coming to Cleveland anyway because I wanted to sign the gift agreement, and because I then made an arrangement to spend a day with Andrew in his lab. And it was a wonderful day that I spent in Andrew's lab. In the morning, I get a full tour of everything and an explanation of how things are done and how things are measured, et cetera, et cetera. But it's the afternoon that for me is the creme de la creme, because you see, I had told Andrew in advance that I wanted to speak to the people in his lab. And Andrew took that request very seriously. And so he arranged for me to have 15 to 20-minute chunks of time with each person in his lab pretty much individually. And so it took all afternoon. And I practically had to be yanked away from each of these conversations because they were so interesting. Each of them could have gone on for 2 or 3 hours, but I had to go on to the next conversation. So what I was saying to these trainees is I told them a couple of sentences about myself, and then I asked each of them how they had gotten to Andrew's lab and where they saw their own life being 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. And then I cut to the chase and I said to each of them, so tell me about Andrew. What's he really like? What's the best you can tell me about him? What's the worst you can tell me about him? What about him do you wish were different? What's he like on a typical day? How does he make you feel? Well, although each of these people came to Andrew's lab having different experiences and different backgrounds, there was a very common thread in what each person said to me. And essentially what they said is the following. They loved working with Andrew. They admired and respected him tremendously. Andrew knew how to bring out the best in them. He knew how to help them work cooperatively with each other. he knew how to inspire them. He knew how to mentor them. He knew how to make them feel valued and validated. He was generous in spirit. He would support them, even when it didn't benefit his own lab directly, but he knew it would benefit these trainees as individuals to become better doctors. And 3 or 4 of them told me that they wouldn't be in research at all if it weren't for Andrew. And so as I'm listening to all of this, it's like a light bulb goes off in my brain. And I think to myself, oh my God, this is exactly what I've wanted. This is what I've wanted for 40 years, ever since I first had the image that this is what I wanted to do. This is the type of person I wanted in this chair. You see, everything Bob Ronis told me about Andrew turned out to be absolutely true, 100% true, 1,000% true. But I had to see it for myself because this chair really mattered to me. It really mattered to me. And so by the end of that afternoon, I knew I would be very happy if Andrew was chosen as the chairholder. And 3 months later, the selection committee did choose Andrew as the chairholder. So I want to thank the selection committee for its wonderful choice, and I can only hope their choice in future decades and generations will be as good and as wonderful. I want to thank Case Western Reserve because this whole process has been such a smooth and had virtually no hiccups. And there was never pressure on me. It was never me on one side and the university on the other. It was always that I shared my vision with the university. The university was enthusiastic about the vision. And then all of us worked together as a team together to make it happen. And that's how I have felt for this past year. And that is why it has been such a joyful experience for me this past year. And I thank all of you at Case Western Reserve. And I want to just leave you with two final thoughts. One is, I always knew that this endowed chair would be a source of tremendous pride for me. But what I never anticipated was the tremendous strength and depth of the friendships that would develop with each of the core people I dealt with in the process of creating this endowed chair. And my very final thought is this. For anyone in this room or listening virtually who might have considered creating an endowed chair, I can only say that I hope you keep thinking about it, because it really is a good thing to do. And because, and this may be the most important part or the best part, and because if your inaugural chairholder is anything like my inaugural chairholder, you'll be really happy you decided to do it.
Becca, that was nothing short of remarkable and phenomenal. We have a glass vase bowl for you which is inscripted, the Rebecca E. Barchas, MD Professorship in Translational Psychiatry with today's date on it. And we will provide it for you. We'll package it up so you don't drop it on the way. I'll get this to you. Well, I'm just glad I got to begin my remarks before, because I think it'll be a remarkable act to follow for Drs. Ronis and Pieper. It is my opportunity now to introduce Dr. Ronis, who will introduce today's recipient, Dr. Andrew Pieper. I would like to just very briefly comment and frankly to reiterate that what you just heard about Dr. Pieper, who is in fact one of the most creative scientists on our campus. I think we would all agree. Every time he does a research presentation, I learn a great deal, both from his unbridled enthusiasm, his ability to connect disparate information, and the seamless arch that he creates from hypothesis to conclusion, which I frankly view as an art form, and I'm sure you'll hear of that today. Now, I'd love to give you a very brief introduction, given the time and the need to move on to Dr. Pieper, about our introducer, Dr. Robert Ronis, but he has just become the Emeritus Douglas Stanford Bond Professor and Emeritus Chairman of the Department of Psychiatry of our School of Medicine and the University Hospitals. He was, in fact, the first L. Douglas Lenkowsky Professor of Psychiatry at CWRU and the Director of the Center for Evidence-Based Therapeutics. Dr. Ronis himself graduated from medical school in 1982. He completed his residency in psychiatry also at university hospitals, was a member and volunteer of the National Health Services Corps, was the first full-time psychiatrist in southeastern Ohio as a member of that National Service Corps, and then returned to Case to develop a community psychiatry program in 1990, was the chair and director of the UH residency program, and then vice chair of the department from 1996 to 2004, interim chair, and became the permanent chair in 2007. He was appointed psychiatrist in chief in 2009. Since he became chair, the department has grown threefold, from 35 to over 130 total providers. It's moved from Hannah Pavilion to multiple sites at 7 hospitals and joint ventures with over 210 inpatient beds, a huge expansion of the service throughout the UH system. He opened adolescent child psychiatry inpatient units, a new med psych unit, support for transitional aged youth, for women's health, college mental health, addiction programs, forensic psychiatry, geriatric psychiatry, consultative liaison psychiatry. So he's really established the modern era of the Department of Psychiatry. His department publishes over 200 papers a year across the spectrum of mood disorders, schizophrenia, older adults, medication non-adherence, impact of community case management. And I should also note that he is past director of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, a board that he was a member of for 8 years, and was vice chair of that board as well. So with that introduction for Dr. Ronis, and I'm not sure I'll be able to do it again because of his emeritus status, so thank you for your incredible years of service to the university and to university hospitals.
Well, thank you, Dean Gerson. I'm sorry Dr. Barchas couldn't get a little enthusiasm about the chair, but it's just been wonderful working with Rebecca and going through this whole process. And you began and you're finishing my term as a chair. I promised her that I would still be chairman when this chair was given, and so with Dean Gerson's permission, I will temporarily be chairman for a day. So, thank you. So I'm very honored to be the one to introduce Dr. Andrew Pieper to you, although you've heard a bit about him already, and to welcome the families and the friends of Drs. Barchas and Pieper to Cleveland and to Case Western Reserve University. And of course, I want to add my personal thanks for Dr. Barkas's support and amazing gift. I've had the privilege of developing a relationship with her for about 15 years, and it's my opportunity to express gratitude for her wonderful gift to the school and for her doing so while I'm still in a position to participate. This gift is even more meaningful than many. As I'm sure you gleaned from her remarks, it's not that Dr. Barchas is a person of great personal wealth. She is far from that. And yet, thanks to having a modest lifestyle and having values and a purpose in mind for her entire career, and as we heard, all the way back to when she was 6 years old, perhaps, that she has been able to achieve this remarkable gift for us. So we are fortunate that Dr. Barchas chose to attend Case Western Reserve and has chosen to give back to our department at this critical time. So let me turn to Dr. Pieper, who has nervously awaited the result of my requesting him for personal photos, the kind of information not traditionally found on an NIH bio sketch, and additional thanks to his lovely wife, Connie, who managed to supplement with a few photos he may or may not be aware of. So to borrow a phrase, put on your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy ride. So let's begin at the beginning. Andrew was born to proud parents, Beth and Hans, in 1970 in Covington, Virginia. I had to look up to see exactly where Covington was, and it looks like a lovely little town in Louisiana. He, not surprisingly, comes from academic roots. Hans was a sociology professor, and Beth a children's librarian. He's the older of two children, including his sister Tracy. With apologies, this is actually not Tracy, but it seemed like a good picture to use. This is becoming a theme in these presentations I've been given the last few weeks. Now, as you may have imagined, Andrew was a gifted student and was science-oriented from a very early age. Needless to say, the family learned early on to say no when Andrew requested permission to set up a lemonade stand in front of the house. Fortunately, he has since perfected the formula. Andrew attributes a lot of his later success to some early childhood mentors. On the left, we have Mrs. Currier, Andrew's third grade teacher, although I've not been able to figure out which of these students is Andrew, so we'll find that out later. On the right is Mr. Reek, Andrew's science teacher. And both of these teachers in particular stimulated and encouraged Andrew's interest in understanding how the world around us works and to continue to ask questions and explore new knowledge. Later in Andrew's life, as his academic development began to flourish, he was fortunate to have been mentored by two of the greatest minds in modern scientific inquiry, Dr. Saul Snyder at Johns Hopkins and Stephen Knight at UT Southwestern. I imagine we may hear a little bit more about these giants of our field later, but for now, let's continue with Andrew's childhood. Now, when I asked Andrew to relate to me what he thought was his most embarrassing moment in high school, and believe me, folks, we all have one, Andrew's response was the whole 4 years. So I was puzzled by this, and he didn't offer any additional information. But in looking back at his photo with Mr. Reek, I found myself wondering, when did Andrew become a blonde? Whether or not his coiffure was a contributor to his social uneasiness, there is no doubt he was a handsome young man, and he was no doubt breaking hearts and probably blissfully unaware of this by the time he got to college, which I'm guessing might be his age in this next picture. Andrew attended Earlham College, and where he majored in biology and in chemistry. Earlham is a nationally recognized liberal arts college in Richmond, Indiana that was established in 1847 by the Religious Society of Friends and bases its curriculum on Quaker values such as integrity, a commitment to peace and social justice, to mutual respect and community decision-making. Earlham describes itself as a collaborative teaching community that inspires and motivates students with transformative opportunities and experiences so they can become catalysts for good in a changing world. Earlham prepares students to make a profound positive difference in the world about them. And those who know Andrew know that he really embodies that promise. From Earlham, he moved on to Johns Hopkins University for medical school, which is where he met his future wife and the love of his life, Connie. He met Connie as part of a Big Sib, Little Sib program where, and Andrew was friends with her Big Sib, who introduced them. When he was a second-year student and she was a first-year, you can get the theme here. This is actually not Andrew and Connie. But these pictures, of course, are of them. And I'm not sure what year you were married. I didn't quite pick that up. Is that 2005, 2004? Okay, wonderful. 2001. We'll figure this out a little bit. Well, Andrew completed his PhD work in neuroscience at Hopkins in 2001 under the mentorship of Saul Snyder. And then he and Connie went on to complete their residencies at Johns Hopkins, he in psychiatry, she in neurology, and in 2004 moved on to UT Southwestern, where he joined the research track of the residency and continued on to complete his postdoctoral fellowship in biochemistry in 2006 under the aforementioned mentor Stephen Knight. Andrew joined the faculty of UT as an assistant professor in the departments of psychiatry and biochemistry in 2006. And in 2012, he and Connie moved to Iowa City, Iowa, where he joined the faculty of the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine as an associate professor with tenure and advanced to full professor in 2015. From 2012 to 18, he served as director of translational neuroscience for University of Iowa while doing clinical work at the Iowa VA Medical Center and adding research at the Weill Cornell Autism Research Center in 2014. He served as Associate Director for Research Strategic Development in 2017-18 and has continued on as adjunct professor in Iowa since his recruitment to Cleveland and to the Harrington Discovery Institute in 2018. Now, his recruitment stands out in my memory as Mukesh Jain, who was then the Associate Director of the HDI, called me one day and said, "Bob, I'm really embarrassed to call you so late in the process, but I've been trying to recruit this brilliant young neuroscientist, Andrew Pieper, to the Discovery Institute, and I forgot he was a psychiatrist." He said he doesn't want to make a decision until he meets with the chair of psychiatry. Do you mind seeing him right now? So, of course, having nothing else to do, I said, sure. And 15 minutes later, this young gentleman sits down in my office. And characteristically, the first thing he says to me is, if I come here, how can I help your department? Not what are you going to do for me if I come here? How can you help me? But how can I help you? And I think it's a pretty good indication of the character of the man that we're about to honor. But I do digress. Andrew and Connie, despite their both experiencing highly demanding and highly stressful careers, maintained their, I need some glasses, would really help, wouldn't it? Maintained their dedication to each other and their commitment to raising a family together. And if I have my math here correct, in 2005, not long after their move to Texas, their twins, Eric and Justin, were born. As tends to happen, boys grow bigger over the years and bigger still. And both boys who are here with us today are 17-year-old students at Shaker Heights High School. I asked Andrew about their interests, and he tells me that they both play trombone and are interested in cross country. And that led me to wonder what kind of a career might combine cross country and trombone. But this was the only thing I came up with. I suspect that that's not the way they're going to go. But Andrew does tell me that they're, in fact, both very interested in math and science, and Justin possibly in pursuing a career in economics with Eric. I probably have this wrong. One interested in economics, the other interested in biomedical engineering. And both are involved in the SEO-YES Summer Undergraduate Research Program here at Case Western Reserve for the second year in a row, along with Andrew and Connie's niece, Kate Lindley, who is here today as well. So once again, we see how important family is to Andrew and Connie, both in terms of their families by birth and what my wife Lori and I like to call family by choice. That's the reaction I hear from anyone who has visited with the Pieper lab, that it seems more like a family than a work environment, and that, much as he expressed to me when he interviewed, Andrew is much more dedicated to developing and advancing his lab members than to what they can do for him. This is, of course, a reflection of character, and one of the many reasons I recommended him to Dr. Barchas and to the search committee when this new chair was established. The science of discovery is, of course, critical, but can be taught. The creative spark that can take us from what we think to what we know today towards what we need to know for tomorrow are more rare. But it's really the force of character as reflected by his dedication to his family, to his colleagues, to our patients, and to our society as a whole, that more than anything else, I think, predicts the future success and reflects the greatness of a human being. I have no doubt that Andrew will not only continue to achieve successes, as those I hope he will be sharing with you in a few minutes, but will be considered by future generations to be among our greatest contemporary physician scientists. He is, to borrow a phrase from one of my own ethnic orientation background, a true mensch. As one who is coming toward the end of my own career, I can tell you that while we encounter many along the way with great intellect and dedication to their work, there are too few for whom those achievements reflect true selflessness or acts of kindness and of love. And that is what Andrew Pieper represents, in my opinion, and what brings us hope for a brighter future in our darkest hours. Andrew, my only regret is that your path forward will be under a new, as not yet selected, department chairman. I hope that he or she has the insight to recognize what a gift you have and what a gift you are. And so in closing, I am most proud to introduce to you all the director of the Center for Brain Health Medicine at University Hospital's Harrington Discovery Institute, the director of the Translational Therapeutics Core of the Cleveland Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and the associate director of the Case Western Reserve University Medical Student Training Program, and now the inaugural chairholder for the Rebecca E. Barchas, MD, Professorship in Translational Psychiatry, my friend and colleague, Andrew Pieper.
Wow. Well, thank you all for being here. I couldn't be happier to be the inaugural chairholder of the Rebecca E. Barchas, MD, Professor of Translational Psychiatry. And as Rebecca mentioned, getting to know Rebecca has been an absolute joy. And I just feel very lucky, so thank you. And Bob, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're very glad that you're not going anywhere, even though you're stepping down as chair. And we're very grateful for everything you've done for the department. So I was asked to speak about my personal history and my interest in science and how that developed. And Bob actually showed a lot of my slides already. So, you've already seen my parents, and they're right over there, and they haven't changed a bit. Married in 1966, and there I am 4 years later. And I feel very lucky. Obviously, I was very loved as a child. I believe I still am. But as a psychiatrist, these pictures make me feel very secure. And that is my sister, the little girl next to me holding the teddy bear, and she's right there. And you can see she's looking up to me with great reverence, which I hope still continues today. I'm not sure. My Aunt Carlin is over there, and her kids, one of whom is here, are now fully grown, Hannah and Nathan. And boy, people sure do grow up fast. So this is my graduation picture from college. And there are four people actually, that are missing from this picture that are really important in my life. The first is my brother-in-law, Tracy's husband, Phil. He's a retired commander from the Navy, and he's also my relentless exercise taskmaster that I have to check in with every day to make sure that I've completed my guaranteed exercise. And the second is my wife, Connie. As Bob mentioned, we met in medical school. Thank goodness I was friends with her big sib. We dated for just a few years, and she finally agreed to marry me. At least that's the way that I tell the story. And it's been wonderful. And here we are just last week on our first vacation since COVID on a beach in Greece. And it was a wonderful vacation. And we've done a lot of really fun stuff together. And the most important thing that we've done is make Eric and Justin. So these are pictures that Bob already showed, but it's amazing to watch your twin boys grow up. They destroyed our house in Texas the way that I never could realize a house could be destroyed. So then we had to get out of there. We moved to Iowa, and they became really good skiers and world travelers, and now they are growing into fine young men. We are so proud of who you have become. And I made a little diagram. Actually, Emmy from the lab helped me make this diagram active. And this basically shows my course. And you can see that I've pretty much centered in this one area. And I'll get to why that may be in a minute. But I was born in Covington, Louisiana. We moved to Athens, Georgia when my dad was in graduate school, getting a PhD in sociology. And then we moved to Evansville, Indiana. And I would say that, I'll get to the rest of it in a second, but what I would say is that one of the main things that I know Rebecca and I talked a lot about is mentorship, and she mentioned it in her talk just now. And I've been very fortunate, not just growing up to have great mentors as a child, but also through all the stages of my career. And so I wanted to give a short example of people who have been very important to me along these steps of the way. So when it came to figuring out what is a mentor, there are many different definitions. And I found actually the perfect definition in the memoirs of Rebecca's husband, John, when he said, mentors instruct and coach, but more importantly, they shape attitudes, values, and character. And I have been so lucky to have people in my life at each stage who have done this for me. So beginning, because I'm only in half the United States, I can cut off the other portion. And I can show you the beginning. Mrs. Currier and Mr. Reek, you'll notice that I have cropped out the embarrassing picture from my Eagle Scout ceremony that Bob so kindly shared with everybody. But Mrs. Currier taught me that I could do anything that I wanted, and not like grow wings and fly, but that I shouldn't feel inhibited from trying anything. And I think she did that for all her students, but I felt like she did it especially for me. And Mr. Reek really cultivated my interest in biology. I was interested in potentially other aspects, math, et cetera, and it was Mr. Reek that made biology extremely exciting for me. And that was the reason why, when I went to Earlham College, I decided to major in biology and chemistry. And it's funny because Emmy drew this circle for me. Thank you, Emmy. But the circle actually represents the circle that my dad drew on the map when he said, these are the places that you can apply to college. So, didn't want me to go too far. He said you can apply anywhere within this circle. This circle represents that. And so what I did was I went to the very edge of the circle right there at Earlham College. And it was a great experience. And at Earlham, I met who is a man who has become a lifelong friend and a mentor to me, Dan Bratt. And I met him in kind of a funny way. I had become interested in research, and I wanted to do real bench research, and they didn't have that option at Earlham because it was a small school. So I applied to a bunch of programs around the country, and I got accepted to do it at the Mayo Clinic. But I didn't know where I was going to stay or where I was going to live. And my advisor at Earlham said, oh, you should contact this man, Dan Bratt. I said, who's Dan Bratt? That's a funny last name, which is funny because Pieper is a funny last name too. But he said, oh, Dan is wonderful. He was one of our best students, and now he's in the MD PhD program at the Mayo Clinic, and he can help you find a place to stay. He'll tell you where to go. So around that time, email had just been invented. So I emailed him and said, hey, I introduced myself, and I'm coming. Could you give me an idea about where might be a good place to live in Rochester, Minnesota? And he just wrote back a very short email. Andrew, I can't wait to meet you. I'm going to be out of the country. You should stay with me. Here's my address. I never lock the door. But just go in there, make yourself at home. I'll be there in about a month. I'm going to be in Australia. So I drove up to Minnesota and I moved into this house, and I always wondered, is this still the right house? Until about 4 weeks. 4 weeks later when Dan arrived, and we got to know each other and we became really good friends. And in talking with him and getting to know him, I really realized that I wanted to follow in his footsteps and pursue MD, PhD training for all the reasons that he helped articulate were important to him. It really resonated with me, and we've stayed friends to this day. Incidentally, he's now the chair of pathology at Northwestern University, and he's still, I still lean on him for a lot of advice these days. After Earlham College, as Bob mentioned, I went to Johns Hopkins University. That's where I met Connie, and I had these 3 just amazing mentors in my life that I want to tell you about. The first is Saul Snyder, who was my thesis advisor. Saul is one of the most well-renowned neuroscientists of our era, and he taught me to always ask the big question, not to make small, or not try to make only small iterative changes, but to ask what is the bigger question, what could actually make a difference, and what are you most excited about? And he also basically taught me not to get discouraged. And any time that I would feel like things didn't work very well, experiment failed, I would go talk to him, and I would just leave his office thinking like everything was great and it worked perfectly, and I would go right back out and do it again. And he's renowned for that skill, and I just really appreciate all of the guidance and support that he gave me. He also taught me the importance of family at all times. I mean, I understood that already, but I would be in his office with him, and he would get a phone call, and it'd be his wife, and he would just stop everything and go talk to her. And not only did he speak openly about his own family, but he took an active interest in all of the family members of all of his students, which is amazing because he's had over 100 students. And even to this day, he remembers our kids' names, events in our lives. It's really impressive. And it's not because he has a photographic memory, it's because he really cares and he's interested in that. My other 2 mentors in Baltimore that I really want to mention are Paul Mchugh and Glenn Treesman. I learned basically how to take care of patients from them. Paul Mchugh was the chairman of Psychiatry at the time, and Glenn Treesman was the founder and director of the Moore Clinic. And I learned from them, it sounds obvious, but I really saw them practice it. It's important to know the whole patient, all aspects of the patient's life, not just their illness or not just things that might be helpful therapy, but their entire life story. And that's sort of what Paul Mchugh is known for. And I really saw him put it into practice, and I feel very fortunate that I got to work with him so much to learn that. And so often when I'm trying to think about what should I do scientifically or what should I do clinically, I think, what would these 3 people do? And without fail, I feel like it's given me the right direction. So I wanted to share that. And then, as Bob mentioned, after leaving Baltimore, we went to Dallas, where I had my first faculty position at UT Southwestern. I was recruited there by Eric Nessler. I worked with Stephen McKnight and then started on the faculty. And the thing that I want to say about Eric that he taught me is he really manifested the value of just being directly honest about everything that you're going to say. So he was the chair of the department, and he would often have to give people news that they didn't want to hear. And he was able to give it in ways that they accepted, and they didn't necessarily like what he had to say, but they appreciated that when he said stuff that it always stuck. He also gave me the advice that if you're ever negotiating a contract, actually he gave me this advice when I was negotiating a contract with him. He said, get it in writing. He said, if somebody will say something, but they won't write it down, then they don't really mean it. Ask them why they won't write it down. And I try to be proactively helpful the way that he was helpful to me in teaching me these lessons. And then when we went to Iowa, I met Mike Welsh. He also has an MD in addition to his PhD. He studies cystic fibrosis, and he worked in the lab 2 floors above me. And he was very generous with his time in talking to me about my research, and he showed me how all of his basic science research on lung physiology, every step of the way, he manifested it towards helping patients. And I just realized that how important that is to do. And I try to do that with our own research in our own lab as well. So that brings me to Cleveland. Moving to Cleveland has been just fantastic for us, for my family. We love the school system. We love the community. We have fantastic neighbors that have become close friends, Steve and Natalie Haynes, who are here. And as Bob mentioned, I was recruited by the Harrington Discovery Institute. And I have learned so much from working within the Harrington Discovery Institute. It's a vision that was set up by Dan Simon and Jonathan Stamler here to take basic science discoveries that might otherwise be lost and usher them along into medical development. And it's made a huge impact on helping many people across the country, now across the world, advance their careers towards medicines. And I've been the fortunate recipient of that same process, for which I've learned a lot, and I'm really grateful. What I want to talk about here are the people at Case Western who have inspired me since I've come here. Strictly just Case Western, because this is a Case Western chair. And so first I want to mention Stan Gerson, not because he's the dean and not because he said nice things, but or that because he created the Cancer Center. But Stan told me a story one time when we were traveling about how he established the limits by which people can know whether or not they can take a medicine called clozapine. So for those of you who don't know, it's one of the most effective medicines that there is for schizophrenia, and it almost got taken off the market because it caused this fatal loss of white blood cells. And if you get a chance, you should ask Stan to tell you the story about how he figured out how you could monitor what blood range you could be in so that people could continue to safely take it. And it's really, I think it's just helped millions of people by now. So I am in awe of what he did. The next person I want to acknowledge is Bob Ronis, who we've heard a lot about, who has just run a tremendous department and is really going to be missed. I also want to mention George Jasku, who works at the VA Medical Center. George, when I came here, George really kind of helped me in ways that I didn't even ask him to help me, that I didn't even realize I needed help. The VA is just a wonderfully complex system, and he helped me learn how to navigate that, both from a clinical care standpoint as well as from a research standpoint. And I also realized last year that he had taken an active interest in my research, and he had spontaneously started just reviewing my grants when I turned them in, and he would get back to me and say, hey, I hope you don't mind, but I thought maybe it would help if you changed the phraseology to this. And I didn't mind at all. That's the greatest thing anybody can do to help. And his suggestions were spot on, so I really appreciate that. I also want to acknowledge Martha Szadowicz, who has just worked tirelessly to promote research within the Department of Psychiatry. And I want to mention Sandy Markowitz, who is right here. My mom often refers to him as the man who wears the bow tie when she met him some years ago. I see you guys are sitting right next to each other. Sandy and I were collaborators even before I came here to Case Western. And we're working together on discovering ways that stuff that he has learned about in the peripheral, in the body, about inflammation can actually apply to the brain to be very neuroprotective in brain injury or brain disease. I want to acknowledge Jean Lakamp, who is also here. She's our interim chair. She, not just because she's interim chair, but every time I need help with finding a mental health care provider for a colleague or for a friend or for anybody, she has right away dropped everything and helped. And it's always just been the person who's taken excellent care of the person. So her dedication to patient care is just really inspiring. I want to acknowledge Heather Bro here in the neuroscience department. She's a professor in neuroscience, and the reason that I put her here is because she has started a course that I think is a thankless job probably, but is incredibly helpful. And what it is it's a grant writing course for her students. And I wish I had had this kind of course when I was a student, because writing grants is really hard. And I have noticed with our students that after they go through her course, that the quality is just already starting at a much higher level than it was before. And it's thanks to what she's taken the time to teach them how to do. I want to acknowledge Allison Krause, who's a really vibrant and exciting and generous collaborator working on TBI with our lab. And I want to acknowledge Xin Chi, who's working with us on various aspects of mitochondrial biology with neurodegeneration. And then lastly, I want to mention David and Alexa, who recently joined our pathology department. I've been thrilled to be able to work with them. We actually have a paper under review right now from work that they did where they have established what may be the reason that women are at substantially higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease than men, which has been a mystery that the field hasn't understood for a long time. So coming to CASE has been great. And when I came to CASE, I came with these three people from my lab, Coral, Min, and Edwin. We left Iowa, and I don't know that I could have, in fact, I do know, I could not have done the move without them. They moved their families from Iowa City to Cleveland, and so I just want to say a few words about them and what they do. So Coral started as a technician in the lab with very little experience in science, but flawlessly, she did everything perfectly. And in fact, every new technique, she did it better than anybody else in the past ever had. And while she was doing this, she kept telling me, you know, I have an MBA. Maybe I could help you with your grants. And I said, no, we have people to help us with our grants. And then she would say, well, maybe I could help organize things. And I said, well, I feel like we're organized. So eventually, I realized that she just quit asking, but then I realized that she had just started doing it. And all of a sudden, people started referring to my lab manager, and I said, I don't know that I have a lab manager. And they would say, oh, I talked to your lab manager, Coral. And I soon realized, well, she is the lab manager, and I better give her that title. So Coral has been just so helpful for everything. I don't think that the lab could run anywhere nearly as smoothly as it has been without her. No way. She's created an environment that's supportive. She clues me in on the things that other people won't tell me, which is very helpful to know. And it just is so, I'm so deeply appreciative of everything that you've done for our lab. And then we have Min and Edwin, who are the two senior research scientists in our lab. They're incredibly creative. They're incredibly knowledgeable. They teach all of the other students in the lab. And I think, wow, what if I had, just like I wish I had that course by Heather Brohier about how to write grants, I wish I had a Min and Edwin to teach me how to do science when I was a student, because they are excellent teachers and they know a ton. And I'm going to talk a lot about their research tomorrow in my grand rounds. So I know the time is running short, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail. But these are the three people that came with me from Iowa City to Cleveland. And since coming here, we have grown, and we have grown a lot. And so I won't talk about each person's project, but what I will say is that all of these projects relate to neuroprotection. And these are the students, and in Kalyani's case, postdoc, who are pushing forward on these projects with the unified mission of trying to find ways to protect the brain after injury or after disease or in aging. And I'm going to talk a lot about their research tomorrow in my grade rounds. So now I want to talk about the other major factor associated with this type of gift, this remarkable gift of an endowed chair. And that is, how does it fit into the funding of a lab? Rebecca mentioned in her talk that she noticed that her brother's lab was always worried about funding, and Coral can attest, we are also worried about funding. I think that's the nature of having a lab. And for those of you who don't know, these are the two main ways in which a lab is funded. You can get funding from the NIH, or the VA equivalent of the NIH, and you can get philanthropy. And I don't know any lab that succeeds without both of these. So you need NIH funding. It's more substantial. It brings in a lot of indirect funds to the university. It helps everything run. You can't in no way survive without it. But its shortfall is that it doesn't support truly innovative, transformative work. It supports iterative changes that are very important to the field. But when you write grants to the NIH, unless it already looks like it's succeeded or it has an extremely high chance of succeeding, they won't fund it. And so they won't fund innovative ideas that don't have a ton of support already for them. And so I think that's a shortfall of the system, because I think that stifles advancement and creativity in the field. And that's where philanthropy comes in, because philanthropy gives you the opportunity to use funds at your own discretion. When you think you have a good idea, you can pursue it. And if you're fortunate, it'll work, and then you can build off of that. And so I want to give an example for for everybody so that they can see just what types of things become possible with the type of gift that Rebecca is making. When I started on the faculty, when I finished, I did my postdoc with Steve McKnight, like Bob mentioned, and I became interested in this phenomenon called hippocampal neurogenesis. And what this is it's there's a region of the brain called the hippocampus that's really important in learning and memory, and also important in emotional regulation. And it's one of the two regions of the brain that makes new nerve cells every day of our lives. And I began working in the lab to study this gene, fibroblast or neuronal path domain protein 3. It was a transcription factor that had been found to be mutated in patients with schizophrenia, and nobody knew what it did, and I found out that what it did was it controlled this process. When I found out that it controlled this process, I began looking a lot more at this process, and what I realized is that it actually represents a little microcosm of neurodegeneration, in that the majority of those cells that are made in the hippocampus in that region actually they're used for a little while and then they die away. So you have a constant process of birth, maturation, and then neurodegeneration. And so I thought, wow, could this possibly be a way that we could find neurodegeneration or drugs that might work against neurodegeneration? And as a clinician and a scientist, I was well aware of the fact that there are no medicines on the market that will stop the process of nerve cell death. And I was also aware that all of these traditional test tube approaches that pharmaceutical companies are taking to try to discover things that might do that have uniformly failed. And so my idea was that instead of trying to recapitulate the ingredients in a test tube and then screen with robots, could we actually take an living animal model and use this process of hippocampal neurogenesis to find things that would help nerve cells survive for a longer period of time? I was very excited about this idea. I thought it was great. I wrote to the NIH for it, and it was one of the most solid rejections I've ever gotten in my life. Not only was it just a flat rejection, but it was accompanied by insulting statements about how foolish it was and what a dumb risk it would be and how it would wreck my career. But my idea was simply, if 40% of them die within the first week, if we could label how many get born within that 1 week period of time and then count afterwards whether cells had survived or not as a result of whether or not having been exposed to potential drugs, then we might be able to find a medicine that could work against neurodegeneration. And NIH hated it. So I talked to other people, and I talked to Al Gilman, who was our dean at the time there at UT Southwestern. He's also recognized as a Nobel Prize winner, discovering G protein coupled receptor signaling, and he's also a graduate of Case Western Reserve MSTP program. So I explained to him that I felt like if we could find something through this screen that would help these nerve cells survive, that it might have potential for all of these different disorders, because it's not just the traditional neurological disorders that are plagued with nerve cell death, but it's also all of these psychiatric disorders as well. And the essence is that I think that if you can find something that will help nerve cells survive, it's going to help broadly across a wide variety of different conditions. And he loved the idea, and he donated the money for it. And so we were able to move forward, having tipped the balance now towards philanthropy so that we could actually do the experiment. And what I did, with the help of the people in the lab, of course, was infuse over 1,000 different small molecules directly into the brains of mice. And then I would meticulously take out their brains at the end of that 1 week period of time and then count under the microscope how many cells had actually survived during that 1 week period of time. And that's me, younger me, counting cells. And we ended up finding this molecule right here. It's named P7C3 for pool 7, compound number 3. Dan Simon likes it when I talk about what a sexy name that is. But that was how we kept track of the compounds, and that's its structure. And we later found out that what it does is it works by elevating energy levels of the nerve cells. And so all of our nerve cells have the ability to repair themselves over time. And as we age, that ability goes down. And part of the reason that that ability goes down is because our energy levels drop. And what P7C3 does is it helps put more gas in the tank so that the nerve cells can then repair themselves normally the way that they should. And we initially showed that it worked in models of aging-associated cognitive decline, as well as a developmental learning disability model. But we've since then shared it widely with people all over the world. And this is my final slide, where we've seen that it works in all of these models of disease. And this doesn't mean, of course, that it's going to work in people, in even any of these. But what it does mean is that broadly, it works in nerve cells, not just in the brain, but also in the spinal cord and also in the peripheral nervous system. And what I want to emphasize here is that all of these projects are fundable by the NIH because they are more of a hypothesis-driven logical process. And so the NIH is supportive of these types of investigations, and there's been a lot of people who want to collaborate on these projects. But the NIH wasn't supportive of the original one, where basically my hypothesis was if I do a big experiment, I'm going to find a molecule that does something. They hated that idea, and that would not have been possible without philanthropy. And so with that, I just want to thank Rebecca Barchas again for your extraordinarily generous gift, because philanthropy makes these types of experiments doable. We wouldn't be able to do them otherwise. So I would like to thank you, and that's it.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Dr. Barchas, and thank you, Bob, for your comments, and thank you all of us for enjoying the afternoon and early evening with rather incredible remarks and experiences and recounting. This has been highly impactful for me. I've learned a lot, as I said I would, from your remarks, Andrew, and now I get to move us to the celebration mode. So, Andrew, you get to sit in the chair. As the inaugural Rebecca E. Barchas, MD, Professor of Translational Psychiatry. We'll all enjoy it. I'm going to let most of us leave. The families can stay so we can get pictures of all of us. We have a reception outside. Please enjoy, celebrate, and get to know each other. Thank you all.